The sun had not yet fully risen over the far edge of Edrin Vale's farm. The field stretched in neat rows, each plant bending slightly under the light wind. Mist clung to the soil, and the air smelled of earth and fresh water. Edrin walked slowly between the crops, carrying a small basket of seeds for planting later. His boots pressed into the damp soil with quiet satisfaction. The world around him was peaceful, too peaceful perhaps, and that feeling made the hairs on his neck stand up. Something in the silence felt wrong. Edrin had lived on this planet for decades, far from cities, far from war. He knew his fields better than any map or star chart. Every plant, every furrow, every little rise of land spoke to him. Still, as he rounded a bend near the far end of his irrigation ditch, a movement caught his eye. At first he thought it was a shadow from the morning mist. Then he saw it again. Something huge was lying there, partially hidden among the crops, and it did not belong. As he drew closer, his heart thumped in a mix of fear and disbelief. Two creatures lay sprawled across the field. They were enormous, with scales that shimmered even in the pale light. Their wings were folded awkwardly, and their breathing came in ragged, trembling bursts. They were dragons. Real dragons, creatures of legend thought to be extinct or myth. Edrin froze, unsure if he should run or stay. His mind raced, thinking of the stories he had heard as a child, of dragons destroying villages or burning ships in the sky. But these were not attacking. They were hurt. Their eyes, glowing faintly, looked at him with something more like confusion than rage. Fear. And maybe trust? Edrin's first instinct was to back away, but something in him would not let him leave. He had always helped what he could, whether a wounded animal or a neighbor in need. These dragons were living beings and they were in trouble. Despite every warning in his memory, he stepped closer. "It's okay," he whispered, though he knew they might not understand. He could not even imagine how he would help, but he had to try. Turning away was impossible. The creatures shifted slightly as he approached. One of them, larger than the other, tried to rise but stumbled and fell back with a low, painful growl. Its wings had deep cuts and patches of scales were scorched as if hit by fire or energy. The smaller dragon was bleeding along its sides, each breath sharp and shallow. Edrin looked around. The field was empty. No one else would come. No help would arrive. It was just him, the dragons, and the rising sun. Edrin dropped his basket and knelt beside the smaller dragon. Its scales were surprisingly warm to the touch. He pressed his hands gently on the wound, trying to stop the bleeding with strips of cloth from his satchel. He worked slowly, speaking softly, telling it to stay calm. He had never done anything like this before, but he had to try. The creature did not struggle. It did not attack. It only looked at him with wide, luminous eyes, and for a moment, the farmer felt a strange connection, a silent understanding passing between them. Life, Edrin realized, was precious no matter the shape it took. The larger dragon groaned again. Edrin looked at it, seeing the scars, the burns, and the exhaustion in its massive body. It tried to push itself up, and the sound made Edrin wince. He thought quickly. He could not carry a creature this size by himself. He did not have machines heavy enough. But he could not leave them. He thought of his old cart, the one he used to move crops from field to storage. It was small for a dragon, but he might manage with clever ropes and careful leverage. Anything was better than leaving them to die. He worked through the morning, adjusting the dragons, draping cloth to protect their wounds, giving them water with a makeshift trough. They did not speak, but their breathing slowly grew steadier. Edrin's arms ached from lifting and supporting them, but he welcomed the pain. Every muscle he used was a promise. "I will not let you die." He could feel the weight of history pressing on him. Dragons had always been powerful, feared, and rare. Now they lay helpless, trusting him without knowing why. It was a moment Edrin would never forget. By midday the sun was higher, warming the misty field. Edrin paused to catch his breath. The dragon's breathing had evened out a little. The smaller one nudged his hand with its snout, a faint vibration that felt like gratitude. The larger one opened one eye, watching him with something like recognition. Edrin smiled tiredly, unsure if he was imagining it, but it felt real. He had saved them from the worst of their injuries. For now. He knew the danger was not over. If others saw the dragons, fear would follow. Soldiers, hunters, or scientists could come. Dragons were considered weapons by many. They were almost never allowed to exist freely. But Edrin did not think about that now. Right now it was enough that they were alive. That he had chosen kindness over fear. That he had done something no one else would. The field, which had seemed empty and quiet, was no longer just his farm. It was the beginning of something extraordinary. As night fell, Edrin covered the dragons with blankets and placed the last of his water for them. They lay quietly, exhausted but alive. He sat nearby, staring at the stars, wondering how a simple farmer could have ended up caring for the last dragons in the galaxy. For the first time in his life he felt part of something much bigger than his field, bigger than himself. A bond was forming, one that neither human nor dragon could yet understand, but both would feel for the rest of their lives. The next morning the sun rose slowly over Edrin Vale's farm. Mist curled above the rows of crops, and birds chirped faintly in the distance. Edrin had hardly slept. He had spent the night sitting near the dragons, watching them breathe, making sure they were still alive. The larger dragon, which he now thought of as Astrax, had shifted slightly and opened one eye. The smaller one, Virelia, had nuzzled his hand again before resting. Both were injured but they were alive. And that gave him hope. Edrin knew he could not keep them lying in the open field. The sun would make them weaker and someone passing by might see them. He needed a safe place. His barn was too small for creatures this size. Then he remembered the irrigation shelter near the north end of the farm, a low, wide structure used for water storage. It was partially underground, hidden from view, and could hold the dragons if he moved them carefully. But the problem was how to move them. Even with his strength and machines, they were far too heavy to lift easily. He walked to the shelter and measured the distance. The dragons would need to be supported carefully. Edrin thought quickly, using ropes, cloths, and his old tractor. He could not make them fly and he could not drag them roughly. He needed patience. Strength, he realized, was not just muscles. It was the ability to be gentle when it mattered most. Returning to the dragons, he approached them slowly. Astrax groaned when he saw Edrin with the ropes. Fear flickered in his eyes, but Edrin spoke softly. "I won't hurt you. I only want to help." He worked carefully, wrapping thick cloth around Astrax's wings to protect the injuries and securing soft ropes that could be used to lift him without causing pain. The dragon tilted his head as if he understood but did not resist. Next, Edrin turned to Virelia. She was smaller but still heavy, and her legs trembled when she tried to stand. He supported her under the belly and shoulders, whispering encouragements. "You're safe now. We'll get through this together." Slowly, he lifted her enough to slide a blanket underneath and then carefully placed her on the makeshift sled he had prepared. Her body relaxed as she realized she was not being dragged or forced. The work was exhausting. Edrin moved back and forth, pulling, lifting, and adjusting the dragons, making sure they did not feel pain. His muscles burned and sweat ran into his eyes, but he did not stop. Every time Astrax groaned or Virelia shivered, Edrin would pause, offer water, or adjust the ropes. It took hours, but finally both dragons were on the cart, partially supported, ready to move toward the shelter. As he guided the tractor slowly, the dragons remained surprisingly calm. They had no choice, yet they seemed to trust him. Edrin realized that trust was not given lightly. It was earned. And every careful action he took was slowly earning it. When the tractor jolted over a small bump, Astrax let out a low rumble of discomfort, and Edrin stopped immediately, adjusting the ropes and cushioning his body further. The dragon blinked at him, and in that moment, Edrin felt the first real connection between them. He was not a human managing creatures, he was a companion, someone who mattered to them. Hours later they reached the shelter. Edrin had to use all his strength and wit to slide Astrax down without causing more pain. The dragon's massive wings brushed the walls, scraping faintly, but Edrin guided each movement with care. Virelia was easier, and she lay down inside the shelter almost immediately, exhausted but relieved. Astrax lowered himself slowly, letting out a deep, tired growl, then closed his eyes. Edrin sat near them, catching his breath. The work had taken everything he had. He looked at the dragons, breathing heavily but alive. His chest swelled with something he had never felt before. Pride, not from success in his farm or wealth, but from saving lives that no one else dared to save. He realized that true strength was not about weapons or fighting, it was about patience, care, and the courage to do the right thing when it was hard. For the next days, Edrin focused on recovery. He brought water and food, carefully feeding the dragons when they were ready. He cleaned wounds with gentle hands and applied herbal poultices from his farm's small garden. He spoke softly, telling them about the world around them, about the sun and the soil and the crops. Astrax listened quietly, opening an eye now and then, while Virelia seemed to respond with small movements, a flick of her tail, a soft rumble. The bond between them grew slowly. The dragons began to trust Edrin in ways he could feel but not fully understand. He noticed that Astrax would nudge him if he approached too quickly, while Virelia would shift closer if he lingered near her side. It was not friendship yet, but it was connection. The farmer felt something powerful in that connection, a quiet reminder that kindness could be stronger than fear, and that even beings as mighty as dragons could recognize it. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Astrax opened his mouth slightly, letting out a low, melodic sound. It was not threatening, not angry, not loud, just a sound of life, a call, almost a thank you. Edrin smiled. He answered softly, speaking words the dragons might not understand fully, but words filled with care. Virelia tilted her head, eyes shining faintly in the evening light. Edrin realized then that the dragons were no longer just creatures in need. They were companions in a journey that was just beginning. Edrin also understood something else. The world beyond his farm was not safe for dragons. People feared them, hunted them, or wanted to use them. By helping them, he had chosen a difficult path. But it was the right path. He did not know what the future held, but he knew he would continue. Every day spent helping Astrax and Virelia was a day spent learning, understanding, and proving that strength could exist in gentleness. By nightfall, the farm was quiet again. The dragons rested, breathing slowly, their bodies healing. Edrin sat nearby, tired but awake, staring at the stars. For the first time he felt that his farm was not just a place for planting crops. It was a place where life mattered, where courage was measured not in weapons but in care, patience, and kindness. The bond had begun, fragile but real, and he knew it would change all their lives. Days passed slowly on Edrin Vale's farm. The dragons were beginning to heal, but they were still weak. Astrax lay in the shelter, resting his large wings, while Virelia moved carefully, testing her legs and tail. Edrin watched them closely, learning their habits. Every twitch of a tail, every flick of a wing told him something. He felt a growing sense of wonder. Dragons had always been stories to him, creatures of legend. Now they were real, breathing beside him and dependent on his care. One afternoon, Edrin noticed something unusual. As he cleaned a wound on Astrax's side, the dragon lifted his head and looked directly at him. There was intelligence in those eyes, a depth that made Edrin pause. Then Astrax did something strange. He leaned forward and touched Edrin's hand with his snout. It was a soft, deliberate gesture, almost like he wanted to communicate. Edrin felt a shiver of understanding. The dragons were trying to tell him something. They had a story and he was the first human who might listen. He sat beside Astrax, placing a hand gently on the massive head. "I want to understand," he whispered. "Tell me." At first there was no response, only the slow, steady breathing of the dragons. Then, as sunlight passed through the shelter's opening, faint colors shimmered in Astrax's scales. Edrin blinked. The dragon's body seemed to glow with shifting lights, images, shapes, and scenes that flickered quickly, almost like moving pictures. Virelia's scales joined in, smaller flashes that paired with Astrax's. Edrin realized he was seeing their memories, their truth. He saw other dragons flying through space, patrolling vast planets. He saw humans and aliens in conflict, using weapons that burned and destroyed. He saw himself now in his field helping them, and the connection made him pause. The dragons had lived for centuries, guarding planets and energy that humans and others did not understand. They were not invaders as many believed, they were protectors. Edrin felt a weight in his chest. The galaxy had feared dragons because they were powerful, because they could disrupt technology and reveal secrets that governments wanted hidden. The dragons had been hunted not for what they did, but for what they represented. And now here they were, wounded, relying on a single human to survive. Edrin understood something he had never thought before. Fear often came from misunderstanding. Compassion, however, could change everything. He reached out to touch Virelia's snout. She leaned into his hand and another vision came, this time smaller and more personal. He saw the dragons fleeing a great battle, injured and desperate. They had been running from a force that sought to destroy them, a force so powerful that they had no choice but to hide on his planet. Edrin's heart raced. These creatures had faced war and death, yet here they were, lying in his shelter, alive because he had chosen kindness over fear. Edrin spoke softly, trying to reassure them. "You're safe now. You don't have to fight anymore, not here." He could feel their hesitation, their lingering fear. The galaxy had been cruel to them. Humans had not, at least not yet. The dragons seemed to sense this. Astrax closed his eyes, leaning slightly against Edrin's shoulder. Virelia curled next to him, their warmth pressing gently. Trust was growing. It was fragile, but it existed. The farmer realized he had learned as much from them as they from him. Dragons were not only strong, they were intelligent, patient, and wise. They understood survival, loyalty, and responsibility in ways humans often forgot. Edrin also understood that being strong did not always mean fighting. Strength could be gentleness, courage could be compassion and patience could be power. That evening the sky turned orange and purple. Edrin sat outside the shelter, Astrax resting behind him and Virelia beside him. The dragon's breathing was slow and steady, a rhythm that matched the heartbeat of the farm itself. He thought about the galaxy, about planets, wars, and the fear that had chased them here. And he thought about himself, a simple farmer who had chosen to care for beings far greater than he could have imagined. The dragon stirred. Astrax moved his wings slightly, brushing against the ground, while Virelia raised her head. Edrin knelt beside them. Astrax touched his hand again, and this time the vision was clearer. He saw a path forward, not of war but of alliance. Dragons and humans could live together, protect each other, and change the way the galaxy viewed them. The vision showed potential, not certainty. The future depended on choice. And the choice, Edrin realized, had already begun. He looked at the dragons, understanding their story more fully. "I will help you," he said firmly. "No one will hurt you here. Not while I live." The dragons seemed to acknowledge him, a quiet understanding passing through the air. It was not words, but it was connection, and it was enough. Edrin smiled, feeling the bond grow stronger with each passing second. Night fell over the farm, quiet except for the soft sounds of life. The stars blinked above, and for the first time, Edrin felt he was not alone in the galaxy. He had allies, though they were unlike any others he had ever known. Astrax and Virelia were not only creatures of legend, they were companions, guardians, and teachers. And in saving them, he had discovered something humans often forgot. That true power came from understanding, trust, and the courage to care. As he watched the dragons sleep, Edrin felt a calm determination. The truth beneath the scales had been revealed. They were not dangerous, they were alive, and they were in need of friendship. And he had given it. That bond would grow. It would shape their lives and perhaps even the lives of the galaxy. For now, all that mattered was here, in this quiet farm under the stars, with two dragons learning to trust a human who had chosen kindness over fear. The morning was quiet, but the peace on Edrin Vale's farm did not last long. Far above the fields, a small ship hovered silently, catching the sunlight on its sleek metal surface. Edrin noticed it while checking the irrigation system. His heart sank. He had hoped the dragons would remain hidden, but the galaxy was not easy to escape. Astrax and Virelia stirred behind him, sensing something unfamiliar in the air. The dragons' bodies tensed, wings twitching and tails flicking. They were alert, aware of danger even before it arrived. The ship landed gently in the far corner of the field. A hatch opened and figures emerged in uniform. They were humans but not farmers. Soldiers, scouts, or agents, Edrin could not tell. Their eyes scanned the field quickly, calculating and sharp. One of them carried a device that blinked with a faint blue light. It was clear to Edrin that they were tracking the dragons. Fear would have frozen most people in this situation, but Edrin felt something stronger than fear. Determination. He could not allow anyone to harm Astrax or Virelia. He stepped out from behind the shelter, hands raised in a calm gesture. "Stop," he said. "They are hurt. They do not want to fight. You cannot take them." The leader of the scouts hesitated, then spoke with a firm voice. "Those creatures are dangerous. Step aside, human. We have orders." Edrin shook his head. "I won't step aside. They are not weapons. They are alive and they are hurt. If you come closer, they might defend themselves, and I will not let that happen." His voice was steady, filled with quiet authority. The scouts paused, unsure. They had expected fear, not defiance, from a single human standing in an open field. Astrax lifted his massive head, nostrils flaring. His eyes, glowing faintly, focused on the humans. Virelia followed, curling protectively near Edrin's side. The dragons did not attack. They did not roar. They only watched, patient and cautious. Edrin realized that the trust he had built over days was now a shield. The dragons would respond only when necessary, and they trusted him to guide their actions. Edrin thought quickly. The scouts were too many and he could not fight them with weapons. But he knew his land. He knew every ditch, every fence, every row of crops. If he moved carefully, he could create obstacles without causing harm. He ran toward the field's edge, waving the scouts back. He triggered irrigation gates, flooding small sections to slow their approach. He toppled a few crates and barrels, creating narrow paths. It was clever, not violent. The humans hesitated, unsure how to advance without damaging their equipment. Astrax and Virelia remained calm, their trust in Edrin absolute. Astrax lowered his wings slightly, brushing the soil, but made no move to attack. Virelia shifted closer to Edrin, her scales shimmering faintly in the sunlight. The scouts tried to move forward, but Edrin used every trick he knew from years of farming to block their path without harming anyone. He understood something important. Strength was not always in firepower. Sometimes strength was cleverness, patience, and courage. The leader of the scouts frowned, stepping closer. "You are a human alone. Stand down now or we will take action." Edrin did not flinch. He stepped forward, voice firm. "They will not be harmed. If you value life you will leave now. Otherwise I cannot promise they will remain calm." The words seemed to confuse the humans. They were trained to obey orders, not to face a human who understood dragons so well. Astrax shifted his gaze, low and steady, and the air seemed to grow heavier with his presence. Virelia made a soft, almost musical rumble. The scouts paused, sensing something beyond their understanding. The dragons were not weapons. They were living beings, but they were powerful and they responded to trust and calmness. Edrin took a step closer to the shelter, signaling the dragons to stay patient. Astrax lowered his massive head and Virelia curled at his feet. Together they projected quiet strength, a presence that no human technology could measure. The scouts hesitated. They had expected fear or a fight, but they found strategy, patience, and a calm power they had never seen. Edrin understood something important. Humans did not need to fight to be strong. Strength could come from caring, from patience, and from connection with life. After several tense minutes, the leader waved his team back. "We will report this," he said. But the creatures remain unusual. They stepped back toward their ship, keeping their eyes on the dragons. Edrin waited until the ship lifted and disappeared into the sky before releasing a long breath. Astrax lowered his head fully, and Virelia nudged his hand. He felt the bond between them stronger than ever. They had faced the galaxy together, not with weapons but with trust. Edrin sat with the dragons later, under the shade of the shelter. "You see," he whispered, "we can survive without fighting. We can protect ourselves in other ways." Astrax's deep rumble seemed like agreement. Virelia's eyes glimmered faintly as if she understood fully. The bond they shared had grown through challenge, patience, and courage. They were no longer only injured creatures. They were companions who would face the future together. That night, Edrin walked to the edge of his fields looking at the stars. He thought about the scouts and the galaxy beyond his farm. Powers, factions, and governments would not always understand dragons. But he knew something humans often forgot. Compassion could be stronger than fear and patience could be stronger than weapons. The dragons were alive because of him. Their trust, fragile but growing, was a testament to that truth. Back in the shelter, Astrax and Virelia rested. Their breathing was calm, steady, and full of life. Edrin cleaned the last of the wounds for the day, humming softly. He had no doubts now. Whatever came next, whatever the galaxy tried, he would stand with them. Not with violence, not with fire, but with care, understanding, and unwavering determination. The future was uncertain, but the bond they shared was a power all its own. The galaxy had come knocking, but it had not broken them. Edrin and the dragons had faced it together, with courage born from kindness. And in that quiet farm under the stars, a new kind of strength had been proven. One that no army could destroy, one that began with trust, patience, and the decision to protect life. The next morning, Edrin Vale woke to the sound of birds singing in the field. The air smelled fresh and the sunlight spilled across his crops. The dragons, Astrax and Virelia, were awake too, stretching slowly, testing their strength. Their wounds had healed enough for them to move more freely, but they stayed close to the shelter. Edrin watched them, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. They were alive and they were thriving. What had begun as care and patience had grown into something greater, a bond that would last a lifetime. The galaxy had noticed, too. Word of the unusual farmer who had saved dragons spread quickly among the outer systems. Traders, explorers, and scholars came to see the creatures, not to harm them but to witness the miracle. Even some officials who had once feared dragons arrived, curious to understand how these legendary beings had survived. Edrin did not fear them. He had learned patience and calm in the past days, and he knew that kindness could be a stronger shield than any weapon. Astrax and Virelia moved with elegance now, their scales glinting in the sunlight. Edrin had taught them slowly, carefully, that humans were not all threats. They had learned patience too, understanding that he would never betray their trust. In turn, the dragons became protectors, not just of the farm but of the quiet world around them. Visitors saw them as majestic, peaceful creatures, not dangerous monsters. One day, a small group of travelers arrived with a broken vehicle. They had heard stories of dragons and hoped the creatures might help guide them to a safe path through the rough terrain. Edrin helped repair their vehicle, while Astrax and Virelia walked beside the travelers, guiding them with quiet, gentle authority. No one was afraid, and everyone learned something important. Humans and dragons could cooperate, protect each other, and exist together without violence. Edrin reflected on how much had changed. He had been a simple farmer, focused on crops and the quiet life of his land. Now he had dragons as companions, respect from the galaxy, and a new sense of purpose. But he remained humble. He did not see himself as a hero. He was simply someone who had made the choice to care. That choice had rewritten not just his life but the lives of Astrax and Virelia, and perhaps even the galaxy itself. The dragons often played among the fields. Virelia would leap over furrows, her movements graceful and precise, while Astrax glided along the edges of the farm, testing his wings without leaving the ground. They were free yet they stayed close. The bond between them and Edrin was unspoken, powerful in its simplicity. They had survived not because of strength alone, but because someone had believed in life over fear. As the seasons changed, the farm became more than a place of crops. It became a sanctuary, a home, and a symbol. Humans came to learn, to see, and sometimes to help. The dragons showed them patience and intelligence. The visitors learned that strength was not only in weapons, but in the courage to protect what was vulnerable. Edrin's quiet farm had become a beacon of hope, showing that humans could coexist with creatures once feared, and that compassion could alter the course of history. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Edrin sat outside the shelter. Astrax rested beside him, and Virelia lay with her head near his feet. The air was warm, the fields calm. Edrin thought of the first time he had found them, wounded and terrified. He remembered the fear, the uncertainty, and the hard work it had taken to bring them here. And now he thought they were alive, healthy, and peaceful. The future felt full of promise, and he smiled quietly. Suddenly, Astrax lifted his head and made a low, melodic rumble. Edrin understood it as a form of gratitude. Virelia nudged his hand gently with her snout, as if to say the same. In that moment he realized the full depth of the bond they shared. It was more than trust. It was friendship, respect, and mutual care. Nothing in the galaxy could take that away. They were no longer just dragons and a human. They were companions who had chosen each other, bound by shared experiences, patience, and courage. As night fell, the stars sparkled over the fields, and the air carried the quiet hum of life. Edrin looked up at the sky and felt a connection to something greater than himself. The dragons had changed him just as he had changed them. He understood the galaxy in a new way now, a place where fear often ruled, but where small acts of kindness could ripple outward and rewrite destinies. The future remained uncertain. Other forces, other humans, and other dangers might appear. But Edrin had learned the truth: choices mattered. Compassion mattered. Trust mattered. And he knew he would continue to protect Astrax and Virelia, just as they had come to protect him in their own quiet way. The farm was no longer just a farm. It was a home, a sanctuary, and a testament to what could happen when courage and kindness guided actions. The dragons, once hunted and feared, were now free. And humanity, through the actions of a single farmer, had gained respect, not through war but through mercy and care. Edrin closed his eyes, listening to the soft breathing of the dragons beside him. The stars shone above, and the fields stretched endlessly in the moonlight. He knew that life had changed forever, for him, for Astrax, for Virelia, and for the galaxy that had begun to notice what humanity could be. Strength could be gentle. Power could be wise. And bonds, once formed, could shape futures. In the quiet of that night, Edrin smiled. They had survived. They had grown. And together, their lives had been rewritten, full of hope, trust, and endless possibility.